students, this is a video tutorial on how to plan for your narrative. Remember that a narrative is just a story. A story has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it's not quite that simple. With a plot mountain, we have the exposition, which is the beginning, along with the conflict. The climax is near the end, but it is the high point in the story that is the most exciting, and the resolution, which is the end. The first part that we're going to look at is the exposition. Usually, the exposition also includes the conflict. In your plan here, they have set them apart as two separate things, but they really go together. The exposition consists of the characters and introducing the setting. The conflict is the problem at the beginning of the story, which drives the entire story. If you don't have a conflict well established at the beginning of the story, your story probably isn't going to be very interesting. To illustrate how a plot mountain works, we're going to think about a story that we all know. Take the story The Three Little Pigs, for example. In The Three Little Pigs, we have the characters, the big bad wolf and the three little pigs. And they are trying to build houses in the country, and it doesn't say, the story's been around for a long time, but we're just going to assume that it takes place in present day. Remember that setting includes not just the place, but also the time, and those two things are very important for establishing your story. The problem, or the conflict at the very beginning of the story, is that the Pig brothers need to build houses for themselves. But the big bad wolf is making their life harder because he wants to eat them. So that's how the beginning of the story of The Three Little Pigs is set up. Now that we've thought about the exposition, we need to look at the whole plot mountain again. When you're planning your own story, it's really important that you set up the exposition first, then make sure you have a strong conflict, then you're going to come up here, fill in your climax, and then finally do your resolution. Your rising action and your falling action you can fill in after you have all of the other sections filled in first. The next part that we're going to look at is the climax. The climax is the most exciting part of the whole story. It's the turning point. It's the point in the story where, as a reader, you would say, "Oh my gosh, I don't know what's going to happen next." In The Three Little Pigs, you know that the first two brothers, who are not very smart, build their houses out of hay and sticks. The big bad wolf comes along and he huffs and he puffs and he blows both houses down and eats both of the two first pigs. The third pig, who's much smarter, builds his house out of bricks. And he knows that the big bad wolf is coming, so he starts to prepare for how he can outwit the wolf. The wolf can't blow down the third pig's house, so he decides that he's going to climb up on the roof and go down the chimney. This is the point in the story that is the most exciting because we're not sure what's going to happen. We don't know if the wolf is going to win or the third little piggy is going to win. That's why it's the climax of the story. The next part of our plot mountain that we want to fill in is the resolution. Remember that the resolution is just the end. We are now going to try and resolve the conflict that we've established at the beginning of the story. In the end, the big bad wolf falls down the chimney of the third piggy's house, falls into a pot of boiling water, and the third piggy eats the big bad wolf. Now that we have all of our major events filled in, our exposition with our conflict, our climax, and our resolution, we can go back now and start filling in our rising action and our falling action. The reason that we leave these two things for the very end is because it's most important that we've established these three big points first before we start filling in the little details. The details can make up the story and make the story exciting and more fun, but if we don't know where our story is headed, in the beginning, in the middle, and in the end, then it's really, really hard for us to have a good story structure. It starts to look a little bit more like a plot mountain or a plot plateau than a plot mountain. And our story can feel a little bit flat and more like a list than a story. For rising action and falling action, now we just have to go through and make sure that we understand what has happened throughout the story. When we fill in the rising action, we actually want to think about what's happened in the exposition with the conflict and what happened in the climax, and then just fill in the events in between. I like to go from the bottom to the top. If I start down here with my first event, then I know that I have to go upward until I hit the climax. For me, it's a lot easier to look at my plan this way before I begin writing. As you remember, after the exposition is started and we know that our three little pigs are looking to build houses, we know that piggy number 1 builds his house out of straw. The big bad wolf blows down piggy number 1's house and eats piggy number 1. Piggy brother number 2 builds his house out of sticks. The big bad wolf comes down, blows down piggy number 2's house and eats piggy number 2. And finally, piggy number 3 builds his house out of bricks, having learned from what happened to his first 2 brothers. That brings us then to the climax. This, remember, is where piggy number 3 has already prepared for the big bad wolf's arrival. The big bad wolf has attempted to blow down piggy number 3's house, but can't, and is now attempting to go down the chimney. Now we can start looking at falling action. Just like with rising action, we're going to look between the 2 main events, the climax and the resolution. So now we fill in what happens between those 2 things, and really there's only one major event. The big bad wolf climbs up to the chimney, and then he falls down the chimney into a pot of boiling water. That is really the only event that happens between the climax and the resolution. Now, if you'll notice, the rising action events over here, there are far more than the falling action. This is pretty normal. The plot mountain should look a little bit lopsided. There should actually be more events between the exposition and the climax than there are between the climax and the resolution. You may have noticed that I managed to fill in all the lines on the rising action, but not all the lines on the falling action. And like I said before, that's okay. Sometimes you're not going to have all of those little events. The most important things to note are exposition, climax, and resolution. If you have those 3 pieces in, it really doesn't matter how many events you have on either side, as long as you make sure that those 3 big pieces are filled in, and that the stuff that happens in between those things makes sense and follow a very fluid structure. Now that you know how to fill in a plot diagram, you can go ahead and start thinking about your own narrative. What will be in your exposition? Who will be your characters? And where and when will be your setting? What conflict or problem are you going to fill in at the very, very beginning? What's going to be the exciting turning point in your story? And finally, how is it going to end? Is it going to be a happy ending? A sad ending? Is it going to make the reader angry? And finally, what events in between are going to tie all of those things together? Now that you have your own plot mountain that's blank, start trying to think about what your story is going to be. And if you need help along the way, please make sure that you're coming back to this video so that you can watch it again and fill in for your own story. Happy writing! Remember that a narrative is just a story. A story, as you know, has a beginning, a middle, and an end, but it's not always that simple.